All right, so today we're going to go through how to make a position time graph and a velocity time graph for the data from your gravity cart. So the very first thing we're going to do is open up a sheet like this one. You're going to give yours a title and make sure that your title has your group's name and number, or sorry, your group's number in it. Next, you're going to go down here where it says sheet. Your first one will be sheet number 1. I'm going to right click on that one and hit rename and just rename it gravity cart. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to make several columns for different pieces of data. So our first column, we're going to call it time. And the next one, we're going to call it distance in meters. Now, distance in meters is what you're measuring off of your spark tape. So when you go to measure that, your first one is going to be 0. And then your next ones are going to be their distance from the starting position. So you're going to measure these and read them all in. I'm just going to grab them from over here. Call this one distance. Now your time is also going to start at 0. So we'll put in 0 for that one. And your time is going to go up by 0.1 each time. So I can put in the first couple values, 0.1, 0.2. Right, if it's going up, if your spark tape timer was set to 10 hertz, then the time between each dot is going to be 0.1 seconds, or the 10th of a second. So once I've got my first couple values entered, rather than entering them all in for all of my data, I'm instead just going to highlight them all. So I'm just going to click my mouse and drag over all 3 of them, and then click this little blue button in the corner here twice. Just double click it. And what that does is it basically populates all of these lower cells with my time data. So that's good to go. So now I've got my position, or my time, my distance, and I want my velocity. So for this one, I'm going to put velocity, and I'm going to put it in meters per second. Distance is in meters, and time is in seconds. Put time in seconds. So my starting velocity, right as I let go of the can, my initial velocity is 0. That's an assumption that we make. My next velocity is my change in distance, right? How far it travels, divided by the change in time. So for this one, I'm going to click on that cell, and I'm going to hit equals, because I don't want to manually calculate that every time. I want to let Google Sheets do it for me. So I'm going to hit equals and then put an open bracket. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click the cell next to it, which will be B3. So I click that cell and it'll show up as B3. It won't actually show up as the value. It'll show up as the coordinates of that cell, which is B3. And then I'm going to hit subtract. And I'm going to go to the cell above B3, which is B2. All right, so I have B3 minus B2. And then I'm going to close those brackets. And now I want the change in time. So I can go A3 minus A2, but I can also just know that for all of my time cells, the difference in time is going to be 1/10 of a second, right? I know that these are always going up by the 1/10 of a second. So I'm actually just going to put divided by 0.1. I'm going to hit enter. It might suggest autofill, it might not. You can hit autofill if it suggests that for you, but if it doesn't, you're just going to go to that cell and then double click that dot. And what it's done here is it's done the same thing, just populated all of these. And the nice thing about this is I show it how to do the calculation once, and then it does it for every other cell after me, right? So this cell here, C8, is B8 minus B7 divided by 0.1. It does all the work for me. All right, so the first thing I want to do is create a position time graph. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to start where it says time, click and highlight. And I'm going to highlight all of time and all of distance. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. And this is where it's easier to use a computer plug-in mouse than a trackpad. I'm going to highlight all of those cells. And once I have them highlighted, I'm going to go Insert, Chart, and it produces a chart for me. The nice thing about this is if I've labeled everything correctly, it gives my chart time on the x-axis, distance on the y-axis, and it gives me a title. So that chart is good to go. Perfect. And so what I'll see here is I'll see my distance start at 0, and I'll watch my cart accelerate up to a certain point, and then somewhere around here is where my can hits the ground. And so then it keeps moving, but it kind of slows down. And it'll be easier to see this when we plot our velocity time. So I have my distance time, that one's all good. I'm going to go ahead, click this chart, and hit Control C or copy. Copy that chart. I'm then going to go down here and hit Control V or paste it. Ooh, something funny happened there. Let's try that one again. There we are. So I've just copy and pasted the same chart, and I'm going to build my velocity time chart using this distance time chart. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to just change the title to start. I'm going to change this one to velocity versus time. And then over here, in Chart Editor, under Customize, actually, you can just do it right in here. Just click on that title or that axis label and go velocity in meters per second. All right, so now I've changed my title, I've changed my axis label, and it's time to actually plot my velocity data instead. So here, I'm going to click on my data. And I'm going to go into Setup. On my x-axis, I've got time. That's all good. And on my y-axis, it's going to say series instead of y-axis, but you can think of series as what we're putting on the y-axis. I'm going to go here and I'm going to go Add Series. All right, so click Add Series and then click over here where it says Select a Data Range. So I'm going to select a data range. So I'm going to go back over into my chart and I'm going to highlight all of column C, including the title. All of column C. And I'm going to hit OK. And right now it's plotting position and velocity on the same graph. I only want velocity, so I'm going to go back to Setup, Series, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete distance or hit Remove. Nice. And then I scroll up to the top of Setup. It's a line chart. I want to change this one to a scatter. And you're going to see why in a second. So this looks good, right? This allows me to see my velocity and what my velocity is doing. And so similar to kind of up here, and it's nice when they're on top of each other because you can kind of see what velocity corresponds to what position. But your velocity time graph shows my velocity going up to a certain point, and this is as my can is falling and my cart is accelerating, my velocity goes up, and then somewhere around up here is when my can touches down and my cart is left to coast. Right? So over here, there's some net force acting on it that causes it to accelerate in this direction. And then over here, there's some net force, in this case just friction, that's causing it to decelerate or slow down. And what you can see in this data is that this cart wasn't actually allowed to coast all the way to a rest, right? The data kind of cuts off when I still have some velocity. So that means this group maybe started it at rest, but didn't actually let the cart finish moving before they stopped their timer. All right, so for this one, the really powerful thing about this as well is that I can take a trend line of this data. And if I have the trend line, or the line of best fit from a velocity time graph, the slope of that line is my acceleration. And that's really useful, and that's what we're going to do today. But it's important to note there's kind of two accelerations that we're looking for here. We want one acceleration for this line, right? How fast is it accelerating while the can is falling? And then how fast is it accelerating or decelerating after the can has fallen down. So one for this part and one for this part. And right now my data is all in one piece. So if I just add a trend line to that, it's not really doing what I want it to do, because a trend line for all of this data isn't going to nicely follow this. It's going to sort of do an average. It's going to start up here. It's going to be way above my data points for here, and then kind of below them for here, and then above them for here. Whereas if I do two distinct lines, I can follow my data pretty nicely. So I'm going to move this one over, but I'm going to copy it as well and just paste it one more time. Right, so I've copied my velocity time graph, and it's over here. And we'll just move these over a bit as well. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to use columns D and E to split this data. One set is going to be this chunk of my data, where my cart's speeding up, and the other set is going to be this chunk of data, where my cart is slowing down. So the first thing I need to do is I need to find where my maximum velocity is, and that is going to be this point right here for me. All right, so when velocity is 1.12, that is where I want to split my data. That's going to be the last point in this set, and this next one is going to be the first point in this set. So 1.12, where is my velocity 1.12? It's right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of my velocities up till that point. Hit copy. And then over here, I'm going to hit paste special, values only. Right, so instead of copying the formula over that I used to calculate these, I'm just taking the values. And my next data set, I'm going to copy over, and I'm going to put it in column E. Oops, copy it, and then paste special, values only. And I'm going to call D, can is being lowered. All right, that is as the can is being lowered. And I'm going to call E, cart is coasting. Right, so E is the can has already been lowered and the cart is just coasting to a stop. Friction is just bringing my cart to a stop. So now I'm going to click on this graph again. Under setup, I have time on my x-axis, and now under series, I'm going to go in and add column D as a series. So I'm going to go from can is being lowered, and I'm just going to highlight all of column D. And I'm going to hit OK. And then add series again, click select data range, and then I'm going to add all of E. And it's important for E that you don't just take the cells that have numbers in them, but you take all of these empty ones too. And then I can go ahead in series and I can just delete or remove my original velocity. And now, when I look at my graph, I've got can is being lowered, and that's all the data where it's speeding up, and then cart is coasting. All right, so I've got my legend, and if I follow this, my legend will already be there. I've got my axis labels, I've got my title, so I've got everything I need to submit my distance time graph and my velocity time graph. The last thing that this project kind of asks you for is for the equation of each of these lines of best fit. So I'm going to go here into customize, and then I'm going to go to series. And in series, I'm going to hit trend line. And what that does is it adds a line of best fit, one for this data, so it's adding a blue one for my blue data, and a red one for my red data. And I